Good morning to those who are joining us for the SAJC H1 Physics e-learning module. And for those of us who are joining us in the afternoon, good afternoon to you guys. And for those of us who did not do this in the morning or in the afternoon and now are rushing in the night, good evening to you guys. So what are we going to learn today? Today we're going to start the topic of dynamics. Now, what are we going to learn in this topic of dynamics? In today's lecture, we are not going to cover all of dynamics. We're going to cover a part of it. So what are we going to cover in today's lecture? In today's lecture, we're going to understand what is a force, and after that we will go through Newton's laws of motion and understand them. We will go through some examples of Newton's laws of motion so that you can understand it better. And once we have covered all of Newton's laws of motion, there will be a set of MCQ questions on Newton's laws that you must complete and submit by the end of the day. Now, in today's lecture, this would cover page 1 to 5 of your dynamics lecture notes. Now, you may refer to your notes while we are going through the lecture, as it follows quite closely to your notes. Today's lecture is arranged into 4 parts. The first part is the introduction and what is a force. The second part would cover Newton's first law of motion. Part 3 would cover Newton's third law of motion, and part 4 would cover Newton's second law of motion. Once we have completed all these parts from 1 to 4, please download the MCQ questions from Moodle and submit it to your respective tutors. So, we are now going to cover the first part of the lecture. Now, we've already completed the introduction, so we're now going to look at what is a force. Once we've completed part 1, please go on to look at part 2, 3, and then 4 to complete all the lectures. Let's begin part 1 of the lecture. Now let's begin by looking at what is a force. Now force is a measure of interaction between two objects. When two objects interact, it generates a force. A force always involves two bodies. You cannot have a force by having just one body alone. So whenever there are two bodies and they interact, then you will have a force. Now you can describe a force either as a push or pull. If you have two objects and they push at each other, that's called a pushing force. And if they come together and they pull at each other, it's called a pulling force. So you can always put a force either in the push category or in the pull category. Now just to illustrate one other thing, the force is a vector quantity. It has both magnitude as well as direction. Now just to illustrate what a force is, we are going to use a few examples. You can use magnetic force as an example, gravitational force, and contact force. Now each of these forces are of different types. Now, there are many other examples you can use for forces, but just to illustrate the force, we are just going to use these 3 examples. Now let's take a look at magnetic force. Now if you take two magnets and they have the same pole, and if you were to bring them close enough, you'd find that the two magnets will repel each other and they would actually push the magnets apart. Now this force that is pushing each of the magnets out of the way is actually a magnetic force. Now what happens if you have two magnets of different poles and you bring them near each other? You would find that these two magnets attract each other and pull each other together. So the force on the top is actually a pushing force, while the force at the bottom can be described as a pulling force. Now, another example of a force is gravitational force. Gravitational force exists between any two masses. So for example, you have a stone and an earth. There are two masses. The gravitational force will exist between them. It's a force of attraction. The stone will be attracted towards the earth. At the same time, earth will be attracted towards the stone. That's the gravitational force between the two bodies. Now this is a pulling force. Now the next example is on contact force. Now contact force exists when two bodies actually make contact with each other. So you can see that before the car makes contact with the tree, there are no forces acting between the car and the tree. So when the car actually makes contact with the tree, there are forces existing between the two of them. The car hits the tree, so it exerts a force on the tree, and the tree likewise will exert a force on the car. Now these two forces are contact force. So to summarize, so you have seen what is a magnetic force, which is the force between the magnets there. You have a push force as well as a pull force. You have gravitational force, which is the force between two masses. In this example, we have used the stone and the earth. And you have also seen contact force, which happens when two objects are in contact with each other. Now, all these forces are all of different types. One is magnetic, one is gravitational, one is contact. Yep. They're all of different types. Here, this is the end of part 1 of the 4-part lecture. Please go on to part 2 of the lecture.